Graham Norton leaned back in his red chair, the familiar sparkle in his eye as the cameras rolled, his audience clapping loudly as he welcomed the night's guest, the legendary Tom Hanks, who strolled onto the stage with that trademark wide grin, waving to the crowd, soaking in the applause as he sat down. Graham began warmly, Tom Hanks. Hollywood's favorite good guy, the man who's played everyone from a castaway to a toy cowboy to America's dad, and now here with us in London, what a treat. The crowd cheered, clearly thrilled, and Graham leaned in as he often did, aiming for playful banter. Tom, I have to ask, do you ever get tired of being called the nicest man in Hollywood? Tom gave a small chuckle, but instead of his usual soft-spoken charm, he tilted his head and said with an edge in his voice, Well, Graham, you know, it's funny you bring that up, because here's the thing, nobody fucking likes you. The audience gasped, a sharp collective intake of breath, as Graham blinked rapidly, his face trying to stay composed under the studio lights. Sorry, what? He said with a nervous laugh, trying to pass it off as a joke, but Tom leaned forward, his eyes suddenly colder, his smile gone. You heard me. Everyone's laughing with you, Graham, but let's be honest, they're also laughing at you. You poke fun, you cut people off, you make the show about you. Nobody really likes you. The audience went silent, the tension so heavy it felt like the air conditioning had been cut. Graham, always quick with wit, forced a grin, his hands raised slightly as if calming the room. Well, that's certainly one way to break the ice. Tom, you've had a long flight, perhaps jet lag is talking. Tom shook his head firmly. No, Graham, this has been on my mind for a while. You bring celebrities here, you tease them, you embarrass them with those clips from their early careers. You act like it's all in good fun. But have you ever stopped to think maybe it just makes you look smug? Maybe people walk out of here smiling on camera and cursing your name once they're out the door. The audience murmured uneasily, unsure whether this was a scripted stunt or a real moment spiraling out of control. Graham, visibly rattled but refusing to lose his grip on the show, adjusted his jacket and leaned toward Tom, his voice dropping to a softer, more serious register. Tom, I've been doing this a long time, and no one has ever said that to me. At least not to my face. But you're saying it now here, in front of all these people. If that's really how you feel, then maybe you should explain why you even came on the show tonight. Tom looked him dead in the eye, his tone unwavering, because people deserve honesty. They deserve to know that even the nice guys get tired of fake smiles and polite chit-chat. You want stories? Fine, I'll give you stories, Graham. Do you know what it's like to spend months alone filming on an island for Castaway? To put yourself through that kind of isolation, only to come back and sit here while you play a clip of me talking to a volleyball as if it's the most ridiculous thing ever? That wasn't a joke to me. That was work, that was art, that was sacrifice. And yet you reduce it to a punchline. Graham took a breath, forcing himself to maintain composure, but his trademark twinkle was replaced by something sharper, defensive even. You're right, Tom, I do tease. I do poke fun. But isn't that part of the game? People tune in because they want to see a lighter side of their heroes. If I sat here and worshipped every guest, the show would be dull, don't you think? Tom didn't flinch. There's a difference between light-hearted and condescending, Graham. And sometimes you cross it. The audience clapped lightly, uncertain, some siding with Tom, some shifting uncomfortably as if witnessing a family argument. Graham pressed on, his professionalism refusing to crack. All right then, Tom, let's be raw. Let's be unfiltered. Since you're clearly in the mood for honesty, what do you think people don't see about you? Because the Tom Hanks sitting here now, angry, sharp, brutally honest, that's not the man we think of when we see your movies. Tom smirked slightly, as if appreciating the challenge, and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Maybe that's the problem. People want me to be their comforting father figure, the neighbor who never gets upset, the safe choice. But I'm human. I get angry. I get tired of playing that role not just on screen, but off it too. I came here tonight not to promote a movie or tell a funny story about set life. I came here to strip the mask, even if it makes people uncomfortable. The audience, sensing the seriousness, gave a cautious round of applause, more tentative than enthusiastic. Graham tilted his head, studying him, and finally asked, "So you wanted to use this show as your confessional? To tell the world you're not who they think you are?" Tom replied without hesitation, exactly. And if it means calling you out in the process, then so be it. Because maybe you need to hear it as much as your viewers do. Graham pursed his lips, nodded slowly, and then, in a rare moment, dropped his comedic armor. Well, Tom, I can't say I expected this when I woke up this morning. But you've given me something to think about. And maybe you're right. Maybe I do hide behind the laugh too often. But don't think for a second I'll just sit here and let you steamroll me on my own stage. Tom cracked the faintest smile, the tension in the room holding steady, a tug-of-war between two men used to being adored, now clashing in front of millions. The audience leaned forward, sensing that this wasn't ending here, that something bigger was brewing, and that they were only witnessing the beginning of an unforgettable night. The silence hung for a few beats longer than it should have, broken only by a cough from someone in the audience, and Graham shifted in his chair, clearly working hard to recalibrate, his hand resting on his cue cards though he no longer seemed to be looking at them, instead locking eyes with Tom. You know, Tom, if I didn't know better I'd say you've rehearsed this confrontation, almost like a script, and that makes me wonder, are you being real right now or is this just another performance? Tom leaned forward, his voice calm but cutting. Everything I've said is real. Do you honestly think I'd risk my reputation for some act? People have built this cage for me, Graham, and they've lined it with compliments. America's dad, nicest guy in Hollywood, but a cage is still a cage. And tonight, for once, I'm speaking like a man who doesn't want to be trapped in it anymore. The audience stirred, caught between awe and discomfort, and Graham tapped his cue cards against his knee before tossing them aside dramatically. All right then, no script. Let's have it out. You say I humiliate people. Fine, let's talk about that. Do you know how many actors have come on this show and told me afterward it was the best time they'd had in years? How many have thanked me for reminding them to laugh at themselves? You want honesty? I'll give you honesty. Sometimes the only way a celebrity seems human is if you puncture the balloon of their ego. And if I don't do that, people at home get bored. Tom's jaw tightened, but he gave a small nod as if conceding the point slightly. I get that. I do. But Graham, there's a line, and I've seen you cross it. Remember when you brought up Mark Wahlberg's early music videos and played them on a loop until he looked like he wanted to crawl out of his skin? That wasn't entertainment, that was mockery. Or when you brought up Nicole Kidman's failed marriage and tried to twist it into a punchline. That's not light-hearted. That's cruel. Graham's face stiffened, his usual playful grin replaced by something more serious, and he responded sharply, You're not wrong, but don't pretend Hollywood doesn't thrive on the same cruelty. Tabloids dissect your lives daily, studios exploit your images, fans demand perfection. At least when I do it, it's on a couch with a glass of wine, and the laughter makes it bearable. Tom let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples before looking back up. Maybe I'm tired of everything being made bearable with laughter. Maybe I want things to be felt, really felt, even if they're messy. I didn't get into this business to become a mascot. I got into it because stories matter, because truth matters. And I'm realizing now that sometimes truth is ugly, and maybe that's okay. The audience broke into hesitant applause, some cheering, others uncertain, as Graham folded his arms and leaned back, studying Tom with narrowed eyes. So that's your big revelation tonight? That you're done being a mascot? That you're deeper than the smiles and the waves and the charming anecdotes? Tom smiled thinly, yes. And if it makes people uncomfortable, then maybe that's progress. You know, Graham, there's something I've learned on sets that always stuck with me. When things go wrong, when tension rises, that's when the real magic sometimes happens. Maybe tonight is one of those moments. Graham let out a short laugh, shaking his head. You may be right, but I can't help thinking about the people watching at home. They tuned in expecting Tom Hanks to tell a funny story about meeting the Queen or what happened when he filmed Toy Story 4, and instead they're getting a therapy session. Tom leaned back, crossing his arms. Maybe they needed this more than another funny anecdote. Do you really think people are satisfied with the surface, Graham? The world's more complicated than ever, and sometimes the cracks show us more than the polished surface ever could. The studio lights fell hotter now, the air thick with the weight of the conversation, and Graham finally broke the tension with a wry smile. Well, Tom, if nothing else, you've made history on my show tonight. This is the first time a guest has sat on that couch and told me, to my face, that nobody likes me. That's a headline waiting to happen. Tom chuckled softly for the first time all evening, and maybe that's the point. You'll spin it into a headline, a moment, a meme. But for me, it's not about that. For me, it's about saying something I've swallowed for years. And you know what, Graham? Maybe part of me does respect you for being willing to sit here and take it. Graham tilted his head, intrigued. Respect? After all that, you're suddenly giving me respect. Tom nodded slowly, yes. Because most people would have cut to commercial by now. You didn't. You're still here. That takes guts, even if you don't realize it. For the first time in the night, Graham seemed genuinely touched, his posture softening ever so slightly. He leaned closer, his voice quieter, more personal. You know, Tom, when I started this show I was terrified people wouldn't watch. I was a small Irish comic, plucked out of relative obscurity, sitting across from giants like you. I thought if I didn't push, if I didn't poke, I'd disappear. Maybe I overdid it sometimes, maybe I still do. But everything you see here, all the bluster, it comes from fear. Fear that without the laughs, no one would care. Tom listened, his expression softening for the first time, and the audience, sensing the vulnerability, fell into hushed silence. Tom finally replied, "That's the first real thing you've said to me tonight. And it makes sense. Maybe we're not so different, me with my cage of niceness, you with your mask of humor. Both of us trying to keep the world entertained while hiding what's really underneath." Graham gave a faint, almost rueful smile. Well, Tom, if nothing else, tonight certainly peeled back a few layers. The audience clapped more genuinely now, though the atmosphere remained charged, a fragile truce settling in, but both men knew the night was far from over. The studio air was still heavy when Graham glanced at the audience, then back at Tom, his tone cautiously lighter as he tried to recover the rhythm of a talk show. Well, Tom, I suppose the good news is, this will be one for the archives. People will be talking about tonight for a long time. Tom smirked faintly, shaking his head. You mean they'll be talking about how I finally snapped on live television? Fine by me. At least it's real. Graham tried to push the mood upward. Come on, we can't just leave everyone on the edge like this. Surely you've got at least one cheerful story, something about working with Spielberg, or meeting fans. Tom sighed, leaning forward. Cheerful story, huh? All right, I'll give you one. Years ago, I met a young soldier who told me watching Saving Private Ryan convinced him to enlist. He thanked me for inspiring him. And you know what? That broke me inside. Because while he saw a movie, I knew the real pain behind it. I knew he might not come back. And it wasn't funny, Graham. It wasn't light-hearted. It was life and death. The audience shifted, some clapping softly, some staying quiet, and Graham rubbed his forehead with a strained laugh. Tom, you really are determined to bury the light mood tonight, aren't you? Tom shot back sharply. Maybe your obsession with keeping everything light is exactly the problem. Graham's eyes narrowed, his patience finally cracking. And maybe your obsession with being taken seriously is just ego wrapped in philosophy. You say you don't want to be America's dad, but here you are lecturing everyone like a priest. The audience gasped, a wave of murmurs breaking out as Tom's face hardened, his voice low and sharp. Careful, Graham. Graham didn't flinch this time, he leaned in. No, Tom, you've been careful your whole life, curating this perfect image. And now you want to torch it here, on my stage, and drag me with you. If you want to explode, fine, but don't use me as your collateral. The tension snapped like a wire, the crowd audibly buzzing, half in disbelief, half in thrill at watching something so raw unfold. Tom sat back, exhaling heavily, then suddenly laughed, not with joy but with exhaustion. You know what? You're right. I came here to tear something down, and maybe I went too far. But I'm not sorry for being honest. I'd rather leave this stage with people hating me for the truth than loving me for a lie. Graham let the silence linger, then finally cracked a crooked smile, his voice softening. Well, at least you've left us with honesty. And I suppose that's more valuable than another rehearsed anecdote. The audience, sensing some kind of release, broke into applause, this time louder, as both men sat staring at each other across the small table like rivals who had finally acknowledged the other's strength. Graham raised his glass of wine, his trademark move, though his hand trembled just slightly. To honesty then. Even if it stings. Tom raised his water glass in return. To honesty. They clinked glasses, the moment oddly solemn, the audience cheering louder now as if grateful for some kind of resolution, though the unease still hummed beneath the surface. And just as the cameras prepared to cut to the next segment, Graham added dryly, Well, Tom, I think it's safe to say nobody will accuse tonight's show of being boring." Tom gave one last tired smile. "That's the nicest thing you've said all evening." The crowd erupted into a mix of laughter and applause, the night ending not with reconciliation but with a fragile respect forged in conflict, a reminder that sometimes the most unforgettable moments on television aren't scripted, but born out of discomfort, truth, and two men unwilling to back down.